We'd like to tell you a story about Jason. Now, Jason's great-grandparents and grandparents were farmers. They had small farms, but they made a living and raised their families. Now, on these farms, innovations would come along. And these innovations were typically awesome. They'd make their lives better, allow them to do more stuff on the farm, and sometimes make them safer. Now, these innovations came in the form of farm equipment, and that needed work. They enjoyed working on the farm equipment. And they also had a Model T, and they loved tinkering with that as well. It was the family's prized possession. Now, Jason's father, he didn't want to be a farmer. He loved cars, though. He loved that Model T. So he ended up moving to a neighboring town and got a job at an assembly plant. And he worked there for 30 years. And in that 30 years, he saw machines come into the plant. Then he saw those machines become automated. And then one day, he saw a pink slip. After 30 years of service, he got a little slip of paper that said, "We no longer require your services." Just like that, he was obsolete. Now, he was young enough. He could have gone and gotten another job and learned some new skills, but to be honest, he was angry and slipped into depression. Now, Jason's mother, she was a strong woman. She stepped up. She went and got a job at the local Walmart to help make ends meet. Now, they didn't have money for Jason to go to college. But that was okay, because Jason, to be honest, didn't want to go to college. He didn't want to go sit another 4 years in a class and have somebody talk at him. He was ready to adventure out. He wanted to go try new things, and so he did. And he found himself, he actually ended up in Oregon. And he met a nice lady and ended up getting married. She was a nurse at one of the local hospitals. And they had a couple of kids, 2 boys. And Jason had different jobs over the years. He worked at a couple of different things here and there, this and that. It was never something he was excited about, nothing he had passion about. But Jason did remember when he was a kid, some of his fondest memories was working on the family car with his father. And he thought about that, and you know, at some point the cars became computerized. He was no longer able to work on them anymore, but he remembered that time, and he loved working on those cars. So he thought maybe he could be a mechanic. So one day, he found himself, he went into one of the many local car dealerships, and he went right around closing time, and he was watching, and he was looking at all the mechanics, and he was trying to find the most friendly, most approachable mechanic he could see. And at the end of the shift, he walked up to that mechanic, and he asked some questions. And sure enough, he found out that, yeah, it takes computer work. You have to learn a lot about computers in order to work on the cars these days. And it also takes a lot of hands-on learning. But the mechanic was so taken back by Jason, he pulled him aside and he said, "Hey, listen, if you're willing to, maybe do some janitorial work or maybe wash the cars after the services, then maybe you could get an apprenticeship as a mechanic here." So Jason took him up on that. The next day, he showed up. He got a job, and about a year later, he ended up getting an apprenticeship. Jason became a mechanic.
A couple years later, Jason and his wife had some children, and they were in elementary school. And Jason got a note that said that we need to have a parent-teacher conference. He was a handful in school, so it was kind of expected that maybe his children would be as well. And he went into the parent-teacher conference expecting to have a meeting with the teacher, and he got there, and he walks into the room with his wife, and the room is filled with adults. And he turns to his wife and realizes at that moment, this is an intervention. And so they sit down, and the teacher presents the challenges that they're having with their child. And it's all valid, all important things that need to be addressed. And they slide a piece of paper across the table, a single piece of paper that they lovingly called the IEP. This individual education plan was presented to Jason and his wife, and it was really simple. It said, here's how we want to change the education of your child. We'd like to change the way that they learn how to read by sending them to a reading specialist. We'd like to change how they learn math by doing small group math learning and so on. And it was just simple steps, simple changes. And so, because it was a contract, it needed to be signed. And as Jason, the teacher needed to sign it, the child needed to sign it, and the parents needed to sign it. And as Jason is signing it, he looks up and he says, "This is really cool. Why doesn't every kid get one of these?" And the teachers look around the table at each other, and there's several of them, and they said, "Because it's too expensive. It takes a lot of people to make this happen." But it plants a seed in Jason's mind. What if every child was given an independent education plan? Better yet, what if every adult was taught how to create a personal education plan? Jason didn't have the opportunity to go to college. Today, we encourage children to go and get a degree. When they graduate, they stand at this cliff, at this edge, and they're presented with this concept of choosing a path from 10,000 paths. My kids had a hard time choosing what to eat in a restaurant from a 2-page menu. Imagine what occurs when you're standing there and you're told, "Congratulations, you've graduated, now make a choice." It leads to a lot of anxiety and some paralysis for many. And it may be part of the reason why we're seeing such a huge number of our graduates return home after they graduate.
Jim and I both own software development consultancies. We build software. And Jim's been at it for about 30 years, and I'm about 10 years deep now. And in the last 30 years, the way that software has been built has changed dramatically. 30 years ago, the leading methodology for building software was called waterfall. And how waterfall works is you make this whole plan all up front. You plan everything that's going to happen. And then you start at the first phase, and you work through that until it's over. Then you start the second phase and the third phase, and you continue on and on and on until probably not on time and probably not on budget. You hopefully deliver a product to the market. Now, this kind of worked back in a time when our customers walked into a brick-and-mortar store and walked up to a shelf and grabbed our nice, shiny software off that shelf and checked out and went home, put the disk in their computer, and bam! They had our software on their computer. And this was also scary because this was the first time that they got to react to our software. This was the first time we learned whether we built the right thing or not. It's a pretty expensive proposition. So, along came the internet. And with the advent of the internet also came the ability to download files, download software, which was really exciting. In, just a few minutes, or actually a few hours at the time, I guess, you could download a piece of software to your computer. And then the next day, if it needed to be updated, you could get an update. And then if we wanted to deliver new features to you, you could get that the next day as well. So it fundamentally changed how we thought about delivery. Instead of once a year or once every other year, we could deliver software to you every day. But we needed a new paradigm. We needed a new method for approaching how we built software. So the Agile method was born. And Agile, as you can see, Agile has all the same components of Waterfall, all the parts and pieces. It's just not done for the whole product at once, end to end. You build in small cycles. They're called sprints. And you learn, and then you build a piece of that product, you deliver it to your client, and then you wait, and you get feedback. And then based on that feedback, if it's the right thing, you build the next piece. And then if it's the right thing, you continue to build the next piece on until maybe you get some feedback that that's not exactly what they want. And you can pivot at that point. Save yourself a lot of time and money and better serve your customer. So this new paradigm is something that, as Jim and I were talking about this, we realized that this little microcosm in our software industry of how we build software actually really reflects how we do work in our lives and how that's evolved over the years. And if you look at the top line, that really sort of reflects Jason's grandparents. They went to school. They did all their schooling up front, and then they went out and they got a job. And hopefully, they maybe got promoted, maybe they got promoted again, and then they retired. And then they reflected. Whereas the bottom line looks a lot like Jason's life, right? He had some upfront schooling, sure. You got to get some of that school out of the way, get your foundation. And then he learned as he did, and he iterated. And he found jobs he didn't enjoy, or maybe they weren't great jobs, and he would pivot and go in a different direction. And now he's a mechanic. And so we fundamentally believe that this is what our lives look like, the bottom line now, not the top line. We need a little bit of a fundamental shift in how we think of how we live our lives.
We live in a time of exponential change. We know this. Our children know this. It used to take 1,000 people to build a billion-dollar company. Instagram sold to Facebook for $1 billion, and it had a total of 13 employees. If I stood here 20 years ago and I told you that we would be sleeping on strangers' couches instead of a hotel and paying for it, you would think I was crazy. Yet we do that every day with Airbnb. If I told you we would put our children in strangers' cars and ask them to drive them home safely, you would think I was crazy. Yet we do that every day with Uber. If I told you that a man was going to disrupt the auto industry by building a luxury electric car, and oh, by the way, that car is fully autonomous as soon as society is ready for it, you would think we were both crazy. Yet that's exactly what Elon Musk is doing with Tesla. And if you told me that today the largest software platform would live in this thing called the cloud, and there would be 1.5 billion people using it every single day, and oh, by the way, it updates 2 times a day to all 1.5 billion people, seamlessly, without anybody knowing, I would say you were crazy. And yet that happens every single day on Facebook. We know during all of this times of change, and a lot of it's exciting, but it does create some challenges. And the main challenge that Trevor and I are kind of focused on today with you is we're talking about job loss. What happens when Tesla's robotaxi becomes a reality? No more taxi drivers, no more Uber drivers. What happens when autonomous trucking becomes reality? No more truck drivers. I'm talking about, in the United States alone, 5 million jobs. 600,000 of those in California. I'm talking about 3% of the US workforce. This keeps Trevor and I up at night. We're part of the industry that's creating amazing solutions, yet there's a price to pay. And we have got to find a solution. It isn't, you can't just say, well, we just won't create those solutions. That'll fix it. We can't bury our head in the sand. We need a better way.
Now, these are just the jobs that we know of. If you were to turn on your TV right now or open a newspaper, you'd read a headline that read something like what Jim's talking about. But what about the jobs that we feel are safe from automation? Well, there's a new player at the table, and that's AI. Now, AI, artificial intelligence, is going to speed everything up. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of doomsday articles about what AI may do. And scientists are now discovering that AI very rapidly will be able to replace jobs like doctors and even creative professionals. Fortune magazine, AI expert says automation could replace 40% of jobs in 15 years. Now, On the planet, the population has increased, well, has doubled in, well, Jim's life. And it's expected to increase by another 25% in the next 15 years. So let's put that side by side. If 40% of the jobs that we have currently are going to be going away in 15 years, and we're adding 25% more people to the planet, where does that leave us? Real quick, take a look to the person on your right. Now, take a look at the person on your left. Within the next 15 years, one of those people's occupation is going to be obsolete. That's what we're talking about. What are you going to do? Retire?
If we take a look at the definition for what a career is, it's a profession for which one trains and which is undertaken as a permanent calling. What? We need to eliminate this. Every year they add words to the dictionary, right? We need to celebrate the destruction of this word. It isn't valid anymore. We need to stop telling our kids that they're going to get a degree and get a career. We need to change society to accept the fact that it is iterative. We will, right now, according to Bureau of Labor Statistics, the boomers are already experiencing between the ages of 18 and 48, 11.7 jobs. That's the boomers, all right? So we need a better system. Jason got the inspiration. He had the idea during the IEP, and to build a PEP, a personal education plan for himself. It's pretty simple. What do you want to learn? When do you want to learn it by? And what are the steps required to learn it? But the important thing about that, when you look at it, is it literally looks and feels and acts like the waterfall method that Trevor told us about. We need a better system.
We believe that if you infuse Agile principles into a plan like Jason's, that you can drastically improve your success rate and your ability to keep up. And we talked about sprints. And a sprint is just chunking your plan and just taking that first piece and doing it, and then having retrospectives. A retrospective is just a moment of reflection where you're asking yourself 3 questions. What went well? What didn't go well? And what could we do better? So the next piece is, what if Jason asked himself every day, he had a stand-up with himself, and he asked himself 3 questions. What did I do yesterday towards my goal? What did I do today towards my goal? And what's blocking me from my goal? Now, we said a lot of scary things today. There's a lot of statistics that were frightening, to be honest. And it's true, we live in a time of exponential change. And our lives will be fundamentally disrupted by technology time and time again. If we left you with one thought, it's this. If we as people can break this delusion of making a big plan and living through this plan and having a career and being depressed when it falls apart, if we can have a more agile mindset and be flexible and learn and be excited for change, then we as a society can be part of the future that we're creating and not left behind by it. Thank you.